Be grateful. Okay, I can see the recording has started. Thank you for that. Okay, we'll make a start then, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome, each and every one of you, to this meeting of the South Wales Police and Crime Panel, which it will be held remotely due to COVID restrictions. And in addition, may I remind all members that because of the forthcoming election for the Police and Crime Commissioner in the South Wales Police Force area, the Commissioner is not required to attend this meeting and has restrictions placed upon himself because he is in what is called PERDA and cannot attend this meeting. So the Commissioner's office is represented by officers and they will be representing the Commissioner's office in this meeting. Can I ask that we all turn off our cameras and our microphones, and that will ensure the stabilization of the signal, as it were. I will obviously keep mine on as chair. And can I also ask anybody, if you wish to make a comment or to ask a question, can you use the raised hand button on the top of your screen? I can see that the hands are raised, and I will call you in when I can see the hand button has been pressed, and I'll call you in order of the hands are raised. I will leave my microphone on and I will leave my camera on as chairperson. On that, can I ask that, let me see, can I ask the officers for the names of the members that are attending, please?
Yes, Chair. Councillors in attendance are Councillors Richard Young, Councillor Peter Rees, Councillor Benjamin Gray, Councillor Jane Cowan, Councillor Rees-Lewis, Councillor Graham Thomas, Councillor William Evans, co-optees Mel Jayu and Ian Fox.
Thank you for that. Thank you. Do we have any apologies for absence?
Apologies for absence received from Councillor Christine Richards.
Thank you for that. I have no other apologies. So can I ask members and officers whether they have any declarations of interest to declare? I'll take silence as no. Okay, thank you for that. So item number 4 on the agenda is the Police and Crime Commissioner for South Wales Scrutiny Overview. So I'm going to ask Lee to lead on this one. Can I thank you for your attendance, Lee? Is this where you have your presentation?
Yes, if it's okay, Chair, I will attempt to share my screen, and then my colleague Hannah Jenkins-Jones has also joined us now as well. Between us, we will go through the presentation. So if it's okay with you, I'll attempt to share it.
Happy with that? Yeah, carry on.
Hoping
please.
I can get the technology to work for me.
Well, I received a presentation by email this morning. I don't know if other members of the panel have. But,
yeah, have you had it?
I've had a presentation. Let me see. Yes, and it outlines the roles and responsibilities of the Commissioner and the governance arrangements. And is that?
Yes, that's the one. Yeah, I'm hopefully sharing my screen now, so
I can see it.
Great. Okay.
Okay. Okay.
Would you like me to go ahead then, Chair, with the presentation?
Yeah, happy for you to do that.
Yeah, lovely. Okay. First of all, thank you all for offering me this time to speak to you during a little bit of a strange period. But as the Chair stated, the we are in the pre-election period, which I'm sure you're all au fait with in terms of PERDA, and therefore it's limited in terms of the activities that the Commissioner, even though he's still a Peace and Crime Commissioner, can conduct. So in order to be fair, I think it was agreed that maybe this was a suitable opportunity actually to give you all an update on the scrutiny and oversight activity of the Police and Crime Commissioner, which I oversee on behalf of the Commissioner, and Hannah, who will come in, leads on it on behalf of the Commissioner, has done some excellent work over the last couple of years, actually. And I know we've presented annual reports in terms of our scrutiny and engagement, in particular, in addition to our overall annual report. But we thought maybe it was an opportune moment to also to provide a bit of a reminder in terms of the roles and responsibilities of the Peace and Crime Commissioner. Obviously, we wouldn't want to predict the outcome of the election on the 6th of May, but some of this we thought would be quite relevant, particularly if there was a change, or even if there wasn't a change of Commissioner. It's a new term, and therefore it's always worth revisiting some of the core responsibilities. So before I hand over to Hannah to talk about the scrutiny a little bit more, and then we can also respond to any questions you may have, I thought it was useful just to confirm with this slide, just confirming what I apologize, because I know you probably all know this. These are the key statutory roles and responsibilities of a Police and Crime Commissioner. It's obviously to set those priorities. It's the Police and Crime Plan, which we bring regularly back to yourselves for comment and scrutiny. We have a responsibility, or the Commissioner has a responsibility, and I lead on this on his behalf, to scrutinise and challenge performance of the force. So it's very much a lot of that analytical work, sometimes not seen as the most exciting, but it is important, and being able to report that back up to yourselves is important. And I know that's a question that members have asked in terms of key performance measures, not just of the force, but also against the Police and Crime Plan. And that's something which we're developing a suite of clear measures that go along with some of the project work that we have updated on. So, and that will be something that we will also build into the review and the development of a new 3-year plan post-election. And we will bring back to this panel. Obviously, very importantly, is setting of the budget. Once we have the monies in from central government and from Welsh Government, and also setting the council tax element, the precept element, which is something obviously you're very well aware of and very engaged in. That is a key part of the Commissioner's role. Appointing and removing a Chief Constable, thankfully we haven't had the issue where the removing of a Chief Constable has been an issue within South Wales. I hope it never is, because I think arrangements, I think relationships between the two are very good within South Wales, but there has been, as some of you will be aware, we are there throughout our current Commissioner's tenure and various terms. There have been 3 Chief Constables. So most recently, obviously, Jeremy Vaughan, who hopefully will come to speak to you at the next Police and Crime panel as well, in terms of his delivery and vision. There is a role to investigate complaints against the Chief Constable, and I'll come on to later. We also now, since February last year, we're also the review body for lower level internal complaints against the force as well. We will hear appeals of complaints that have gone through the professional standards system, and then we will most serious complaints that will still be dealt with either through internal disciplinary process or via referral to the Independent Office of Police Conduct, IOPC. It's an elected role, and therefore part of that is to be the voice of the public, particularly victims of crime, and we do receive separate funding to also support victims of crime. And again, that might be a useful topic for a future agenda as well, about how we're doing that within South Wales. We have developed some really innovative work. There is a duty as well to collaborate with other forces and agencies. I think you're aware that within South Wales, we have a number of formal collaborative arrangements, particularly around joint legal services, around joint firearms, So others around fleet services with a local authority in Bridgend, for example. But we also do, there's a lot of project work, particularly working with local authorities and health, that we really look to develop as well, to look at that early intervention and prevention. But it's not a nice to have. There is a duty on the Commissioner to facilitate that and support that. And obviously a key role as well is then the Commissioner is accountable to yourselves. So it's very simple, and I know you're aware that the Chief is accountable to the Commissioner, and the Commissioner is accountable to you. So this is where I think these structured and more formal arrangements are important. And there is also, it is in statute as well, about you can't see these things in isolation. So there's a role for the Commissioner to challenge the effectiveness of the criminal justice system and where policing sits on that, and how partners within the criminal justice system maybe have an impact, positive or negative, on the wider criminal justice system and policing. This is just a bit of a repetition, giving you the actual legislation and the sections and the schedules, really, which is a repetition of the just to remember, and also to focus on the element of public engagement, which is something we've discussed at previous panels, and something which we've really looked to develop under Hannah's steer as well, and our colleague Sarah Mahon, and we're looking to further develop that. Is that we're really trying to increase engagement with the public, so we can really capture their views, particularly harder to reach communities. Again, very quickly, just touching on the police and crime plan, just, the legislation expands a little more in terms of what's expected in there. These are all things that you've seen and you commented on. I think one of the things where this feeds into Hannah's overview of scrutiny, which is to follow in a second, is that it does fit in with the overall governance and how we demonstrate holding to account, where we're very much there trying to take the view of being a constructive friend rather than a stick to beat with, because that's the way that we can improve policing across South Wales as well. And we've done a lot of work about improving governance arrangements between us and South Wales Police, as you can see here. I mean, the police and crime panel sits above this again, but the overall key oversight board is the Commissioner's Strategic Board. And as you can see, everything really within the governance arrangements of foresight and Commissioner side feed into that, whether it be the Chief Constable's Goal Group and the Commissioner's Strategic Leadership Group, but other boards which are part of that framework. There's a Joint Audit Committee, Independent Ethics Committee. We have a Resources Board, which clearly oversees of which Peter Cohen chairs, which oversees the finances and the development of the medium-term financial strategy, which obviously feeds into here, as does the estates decisions, which is a big issue for South Wales, because the estate is so large and it's quite a diverse communities across South Wales. We have a dedicated scrutiny board that we have created, which is probably very similar to arrangements that you're aware of within those councillors are aware of within local authorities. And Hannah will talk a little more about how we develop a forward plan, and that's really about some of the bigger key issues that don't fall across either resources or partnership boards. Items which are key delivery commitments by the Chief will go to there, and we will look to scrutinise that, and I'm sure Hannah will come on to that in a moment. I did mention as well another area where some of which we've always had responsibilities, some of which our responsibilities have increased. I know there's been issues in terms of our resourcing, is the oversight and becoming the review body for complaints. Essentially, the word review does confuse things a little bit with the appeal body for complaints, I suppose, in layman's terms. And that has created quite a bit of work. So I brought reports to this panel previously when the changes in legislation were coming in. We did estimate we might get between 50 and 60 complaints a year. It turns out we've had about 150 appeals that have come through. a lot of it's low-level issues. Majority have not been upheld, but there have been one or two which we've pushed back to the force for re-investigation or for further application or for further resolution. As I said, the more serious issues will still proceed to the IOPC or go through more formal disciplinary, and we can recommend that as well if we are on assessment of an appeal. But it has increased the amount of work within the team, I have to say. Throughout this, of course, important for us, and again, I'm sure Hannah will touch on this, is equality and inclusion, and there's actually a revised joint equality plan. There's a joint race equality plan as well, which has emerged over the last year as well. We have, as a separate corporation, so the Commissioner's Office has not only the account, the holding the force to account, but has to comply and be aware as a separate organisation, in essence, of the requirements of equality. But it has been a thread that I know this panel will be aware of. That has been a commitment of the current Commissioner, as well as being a statutory duty. So, and it is something, again, as I said, I know something that Hannah has focused on a considerable amount over the years. I just wanted to touch on working with partners is also critical. I mentioned there's a statutory responsibility to collaborate. You will see your own local authority logos on there, because I think the relationship between the local authorities within South Wales, public service boards, community safety partnerships, health boards, etc., other blue light services is absolutely critical. And this slide could have, you could have added so much more on there, particularly as the shift and the focus to early intervention and prevention and collective responsibility for the solution of causes of crime or any of the consequences of crime can only really be tackled jointly, and it is difficult, as all of these, particularly the public sector, has a lot of pressure on its resources. But it is something that I know has been a priority for you as a panel, and as a consequence, it has been a priority for both the Commissioner and the Constable over the years. I just a couple of last slides from me in terms just to confirm some of the statutory roles in relation to the Commissioner's team. It does state that the Commissioner has to have a Chief Executive and a Chief Finance Officer, both of which, both of appointments, both myself and Peter, obviously are then also approved by yourselves. Within that, there are responsibilities for delivering, particularly oversight, and there's a number of the statutory responsibilities that I've highlighted earlier. I'll come on a little bit more to my responsibilities just for some clarification, but it also includes the monitoring officer, and that's monitoring the role of the Commissioner, ensuring there isn't any ultra vires, steps beyond powers, etc. It's that unfortunate sometimes position of having to say no, which isn't always easy, but it is important that obviously everything is done legally and transparently and fairly. At the moment, a Commissioner doesn't have to appoint a Deputy Police and Crime Commissioner, but the legislation says that they can do, and the majority of Commissioners do. There is currently a review of PCCs at the moment, and one of the recommendations that seems to be emerging is making a deputy a mandatory position. So that is something, obviously, because we've always had one, and ours is our current deputy PCC is also very active in terms of leading on a number of projects, particularly on a regional and or Wales basis, that we can see the benefits of having a good, strong deputy, and it looks as if the national review is reinforcing that. Within the legislation as well, of course, it does delegate down to our heads of service and members of the team, such as Hannah, who's here today, to actually lead on the delivery of a number of these responsibilities, and in our case as well, a number of our key projects and programs, of which much of which we've stemmed from initial central government funding, or our large projects such as the Advanced Prevention Unit, or the early intervention, early action together, the ACEs work as well, all stemmed from central funding, and the benefits are starting to emerge now from those projects. Because obviously I'm sort of focusing on very neutral stuff here, I just thought in terms of clarification around my role in terms of fitting in with the governance and the scrutiny, really. I am responsible for as the head of paid service for all of the commissioners team, the manner in which we discharge and coordinate the commissioners' functions. So hence that governance, really, it's my role to ensure that it is working effectively, that we are delivering on the statutory responsibilities, and that there is the ability to report up to yourselves. The number of staff that we need for that, this is always a challenge. I think very often we've got a lot of expertise in a lot of areas. We're blessed in terms of some of the key leads we have across the commissioners team on specific projects. Where I think is always a challenge, as it is with every public sector organisation, is the people who really sort of make that work, is when you've got the right support roles as well, and they're the things that sometimes go unrecognised. I have to say we've got some brilliant team members, but as you're aware from previous presentations and from the overview of all of the activity, it's an awful lot for a relatively still small number of staff. So it's important that I have that constantly under review, and I think with the post-election, it'll be another thing where we'll look to revise that and look to see whether our resources are in fact in the right place, and whether we need to support some of our staff further or not. And I've mentioned the monitoring officer role there, just as I did earlier. And then the last thing for me, and then I will hand over to Hannah. Obviously, it would be remiss of me not to mention the election process as a bit of an update to yourselves. Same election day as the Senedd election. So, although it is slightly strange coming in a still COVID period, even though some of the rules have been relaxed, there are, and the link there talks about the restrictions on things like leave and meetings and polling stations, and that's sort of made this feel a slightly different. For those of you who are seasoned campaigners will probably be aware of that. A lot of shift to online canvassing. I think it's hard to predict as well, therefore, how much of the messaging in relation to PCCs is landing. You're probably all aware there are 6 candidates running in this election. You have the current commissioner, you have applied candidate in Nadine Marshall, you have the Conservative candidate in Stephen Gallagher, you have a Liberal Democrat candidate in Stephen Littlejohn, I think his name is. You have a Propel candidate in Dr. Gail John, and an independent candidate in Mike Baker. So all of which have had offers of briefings from both myself and the returning officer, and campaigning's well underway now, and we will wait to see the result of the elections, and obviously that will be confirmed in the June meeting of this panel. So I guess it might be easier, Chair, if the next slide now, I'm going to, if it's okay with you, I'll hand over to Hannah, and she will cover a bit more detail in terms of our scrutiny and oversight to give the panel information, and then if there are any questions, it would probably be easier for us to respond to them at the end of the presentation.
Happy for that. Yeah, carry on.
Thank you. Hannah, if you don't mind, then could I hand over to you from here on in?
Yeah, thanks, Lee. So hi everyone, my name's Hannah Jenkins-Jones, and I'm the strategic lead for scrutiny, assurance and equality within the team for the Commissioner. And I just want to take you through some of the ways in which we are evidencing our scrutiny and assurance role in particular. So this is the work where we are holding the force to account and basically being able to put a programme of work together to show how we're doing that. And we thought it might be of interest for you to have a little bit of an insight into the sorts of things that we do around that activity. So the first thing that I wanted to tell you all was that at the beginning of each financial year, we put together an annual programme of scrutiny activity, which means that the force are aware of the particular topics that we're going to be looking at in particular detail via our Scrutiny and Accountability Board. We call them deep dives, so we will say that there are 4 topics throughout the year which we will do a deep dive scrutiny assurance piece of work on, and they will have plenty of notice that those are the topics we'll be looking at. We decide on those really based on priorities within the Police and Crime Plan, any feedback that we get from public engagement activities, if we're made aware of any particular issues that we feel might need to be looked at. And we'll also use the information in force management statement that the force need to produce each year. And all of the information that we have will help us to decide on the areas that we will hold the force to account to over that year. Some of the other things that we do within my team, which is the scrutiny team, will include some dip sampling and quality assurance work, which can include regularly looking at and scrutinising completed stop and search records and use of force records. So when police officers have conducted that activity, we will check to ensure really that they've, in our opinion, used the correct procedures and noted all of the correct information on the forms, and that we feel that the stop and searches and the use of force have been legitimate. And we've added into that, since body-worn video footage has been available in the last couple of years, we've also added into that looking specifically at the footage within our team and making comment on what we feel about how people are treated during that experience, which is much better and much more detailed for us to see than just looking at words on a page. So we find that has really enhanced our scrutiny work. In terms of the HMIC point there, the Commissioner has a duty to respond to all HMIC reports within 56 days. And HMIC are regularly inspecting all forces, including South Wales Police, throughout the year. They come in so regularly, either to look at thematic areas or to look more broadly at everything. And every time they produce a report, we produce a response. And the important thing to note there is obviously that holds a lot of information for us around scrutiny. If HMIC are making recommendations to our force, we will make sure that the force are then responding to that appropriately, and we will hold them to account to ensure that they're progressing anything that HMIC has pointed out they need to do. We also put together an annual programme of engagement in my team, setting out how throughout the year the Commissioner and his team will be speaking to the public. And as Lee said earlier, in terms of the legislation, it's about how we obtain the views of the public. So we will set out a year ahead the specific activity that we will do to speak to the public and how we will feed back to them and how we will use the information they give us. And all of that obviously falls into our scrutiny work. If the public is telling us something is an issue, then we will then use that in our scrutiny meetings as evidence to ask the force what they're doing about it. And the other point that I've added on there is our independent custody visiting scheme, which is another thing that you may well have heard of. It's been running for so many years, but people don't always connect it with the importance of scrutiny. And this is where we have a team of volunteers working for us. We have about 30 currently who all are able to go at any time, 24/7, to make unannounced visits into any of our custody suites. Go and visit people that are being detained in the police cells, and they go and speak to them to make sure that their rights are upheld, and they go and check everything around the custody suite to ensure that it's safe. And they'll see if they've had phone calls and food and that kind of thing. And they do a really good job at that. So we always ensure that feeds into our scrutiny work as well. It's a really important thing to check how custody services are running. If you can go on to the next slide, Lee, thanks.
Yeah, sorry, I'm not so sure.
Sorry,
for some reason it's frozen on me. There we go.
Okay. So in terms of the deep dive process that I just mentioned, so this is where we have the specific topics throughout the year. This is conducted through our Scrutiny and Accountability Board, which meets quarterly. It's alternately chaired by the Deputy Police and Crime Commissioner and Lee as Chief Exec. And for each deep dive, what we do as a team, our team, is that we do our own background research on that issue. So as well as asking the force for information, and we ask them for data, we ask them for reports, presentations, whatever it is that we need on that topic. But we also go off and do our own work to provide a different perspective. So we will often, depending on the subject matter, we may go out and speak to the public, we may speak to victims of crime, we may conduct surveys, speak to our Police Accountability Board, which I'll tell you about later. And we try to get a different perspective about that topic so that we can feed in a view from others, including partner agencies that might work with victims, for example. And all that is brought together to be presented to the board, and it is able to have really, it really helps us to have meaningful conversations and to look at both sides of the coin, because it is one thing looking at data, which the force might be able to provide, but it's very helpful to know what partners and the public are thinking about that topic as well. At the end of the meeting, we are then able to go away as a team and come up with recommendations, and they are presented at the following meeting. So every deep dive leads to recommendations on how the force can improve on that particular area. And we will log those recommendations over time, and we will continually seek updates. Okay, next slide, thank you. Just to give you a flavour of some of the deep dives that we have conducted so far, during the first financial year where we started doing this, which is 2019-20, the topics on your screen there are the ones that we covered. So we did hate crime, antisocial behaviour, the internal culture and wellbeing of the employees and officers and staff in South Wales Police. And we looked at stalking, harassment and coercive control, and victim satisfaction. And all of those were looked at in depth, as I said, from both sides, from the force's perspective and from our own. And in the next slide, I'll just give you a little outline of some of the themes that were sort of emerging from that. There were lots of recommendations for each of those things, and there's a panel report that you should have had for today, which gives you a lot more information on these particular topics. And that report gives you a perspective from a RAG rating of how each recommendation has been taken forward or not. We've discharged some of them, and some of them we're keeping as we're still giving oversight, because we don't feel that they're quite ready to be discharged yet. Some of the common themes that have come across, particularly from that financial year, have included the need for South Wales Police to monitor the impact of their training. So whilst they are providing training to officers and staff on a number of different issues throughout the year, all the time, and what we feel is that they need to do more to just measure how successful that training is, and to measure the impact, to think about knowledge retention, and just to ensure that it's not just a tick box exercise, that people are attending training. We've also stressed the importance of South Wales Police in being able to provide positive stories and outcomes to the public, because there are lots of positive stories. Lots of victims do have really great treatment and really good outcomes of their cases, but there's still a lot of fear and sometimes a lack of confidence for people to come forward and report certain crimes. So we've suggested that if the force are able to promote some of their positive stories more to the press, that maybe people would be more comfortable and know what might happen to them if they report a case. The particular ones that we've mentioned here are in relation to hate crime and in relation to stalking and harassment and coercive control, because we found that those vulnerable victims really were often fearful, didn't really know what would happen if they came forward. So we've asked the force to think more about how they promote that. And we've also stressed the importance of the vulnerability to be recognised as a priority when victims are updated about their case, because sometimes victims are finding that they're not getting regular updates on their case. We found that just most recently in our survey that we did in November to the public, and we just feel that it may not be possible to always update people all of the time when there's a busy force, but we've asked for vulnerability to be considered. So if victims are vulnerable, potentially because of their age or because of a hate crime or a domestic abuse case, then we would ask that they would be prioritised to be given updates along the way. The next slide, I think, shows the current financial year, which we've just come into the end of now. But these are the deep dives that we've been conducting over this financial year. So we've done racial disproportionality, community engagement, Black, Asian and minority ethnic representation across the force, and we're just about to conduct a deep dive on child protection, which is next week. And then our new forward plan will begin again. And on the next slide, I've just given a little outline again, a little flavour of some of the themes coming out of these topics. Again, each one leads to different recommendations, and there are lots of them. But in particular, we've picked up here that we've asked the force to really address some of the data quality issues they have on ethnicity. There is disproportionality around race for a number of areas, and we've been very clear about that. We want that disproportionality to reduce. But there are also areas where the data is just not captured enough. So there are too many missing pieces of data that make it impossible to make a conclusion about some ethnicity disproportionality. We've asked the force to be more careful about capturing that and ensuring that it's always asked and it's always recorded on our systems. We've also asked the force to consider the need for stop search practice changes, because this particularly comes from our looking at body-worn video footage, really, looking at how force officers interact with communities. So they might be conducting compliant stop searches on paper. Yes, the force might say that everything is great because their stop searches are legitimate, and there's no question that the majority are. But what we find is that sometimes those interactions just need to be a little more human, really. People need to think about the language they're using when they're speaking to people on the street and trying to keep that experience just a human interaction without just speaking legislative words that they won't always understand. So we've just asked them to consider more about that encounter so that people leave feeling happier and not stressed, and sometimes lead into complaints. We've also asked the force to consider capturing some force-wide implications arising from their engagement activities. They do a lot of engagement, and we recognise that in our deep dive on community engagement. A lot goes on across the whole force area and all the 7 local authority areas. We've just asked them to consider sometimes bringing all that together for some force-wide information on community tensions or things that we can learn across the board, rather than just keeping it to pockets of areas. And finally, we've asked them to think about some more approaches to positive action to encourage minority ethnic people to join South Wales Police. The numbers are increasing, and we've invested a lot of work in this over the last 5 years, but we feel like there are some changes that might need to be made now for us to be even more proactive in that area. The next slide, thank you. I just finally wanted to tell you a little about our Police Accountability and Legitimacy group, which is another layer to our scrutiny work. So this group is made up of partner agencies and independent community members, and they work with us to act as a critical friend to South Wales Police, but they're part of us. We are chaired by Lee at the moment, and it allows independent people and partner agencies we work with to comment on what South Wales Police is doing, and we listen to their perspectives, we ask them for feedback, and all of that helps us to hold the force to account together. The meetings are held quarterly, and some of the things that we've looked at are listed there, and they include, often we look at issues like stop and search and use of force because they're always of interest to communities, but they've also looked at things like automated facial recognition. The police response to COVID was one of the things we looked at in the last 12 months. And also particularly of interest at the moment is how police are interacting with minority ethnic communities, because of some of the tensions that we've been seeing. And PALG are really able to provide an excellent perspective on a wide range of issues, and we found it really helpful to have this group in place. All the findings and outcomes are obviously then fed into South Wales Police, and we use that information to inform our scrutiny programme. I think that might be the last slide, yes. So I'll hand back to Lee at this point then, just to close things off. Thank you.
Thank you there. Thank you, Hannah. Hopefully I've stopped sharing my screen now. Is that the case?
Yeah.
Yep.
Yep. That's great.
Okay, thank you, Chair. I don't know there whether you or the members of the panel now would like to ask myself or Hannah any questions based on that presentation.
Can I firstly offer our thanks for a very informative presentation, and I am going to open it up to the members of the panel. I have one individual at the moment that is indicating to speak. Mr. Ian Fox, would you like to come in?
Yes, hello. Thank you both very much.
Ian, you're very, very quiet. I don't know.
Can you hear me now, Chair?
Very, very, very faintly. No, I'm not sure if anybody else can hear, but I'm getting a very faint signal from you.
Very faint.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Chair, if I may, is it possible that Ian could text me off or tell me what question he wants to ask, and I can ask it on his behalf?
Yeah. Are you happy with that?
Any better
Yeah.
now, Chair?
Oh, it's a little bit better, but it's still faint. But it is better.
Well, I'll bawl into this microphone if I may.
Ah, yes, that's better.
Thank you both very much for that presentation. I mean, having had experience of scrutiny over the years in MOJ and Home Office, a couple of questions really, and looking forward to post election period. Given the Home Secretary's intention to include targets now for PCCs and the debates surrounding that, and your mention of topics for future agendas and engagement, increasing engagement with the public, given the public kind of apathy in many ways towards PCC voting in the past, is there any relationship between possible public apathy, the 15% low turnout, and from my perspective anyway, the absence of performance indicators which can be connected to local authorities? I mean, from a scrutiny point of view, it seems that if the information is available and can be segmented into local authority areas which enable local accountability to be deliverable, would that, in your opinion, increase public interest or awareness of the PCC role? I'm aware that at the moment the performance indicators and the measures are on an all South Wales basis. What's your view of the desirability if the measures can be segmented, if the information is available, for local councillors to have, if you like, Bridgend or RCT readouts from the performance of the PCC? Because it seems to me that would strengthen the role of the panel, it would increase public interest and awareness, it would make the PCC role more relevant to local people if they had that kind of segmented local information. That's one question. And I suppose the other question is, has it ever been considered to have a panel rep or observer on your scrutiny and accountability board or the police accountability and legitimacy groups? Just a secondary question. Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, there is a number of questions in there. Lee, are you comfortable to take that?
Yeah, I'll try and unpack some of that, Ian. Thank you for that. I mean, you've I suppose, look, I made a couple of notes really, so if I haven't addressed each point in there, please jump in. But I think the first area you picked up on quite rightly, and I mentioned it, was there is a current review of peace and crime commissioners. It's actually a two-part review. So the initial part of the review, excuse me, finished prior to the selection period, and generally it's nothing particularly innovative has emerged from this first stage, but other than there are, as you say, some indications that there are elements of the commissioner's role which are likely to be strengthened. I suppose so. You've got an indication there that I think that even though I know the commissioners aren't wholly well regarded, I think the role of the commissioner looks to be one that is there to stay for the time being. But part of that is to strengthen the oversight and scrutiny role of commissioners, of chief constables and their police services that they have oversight with. I think part of the some criticism sometimes is that maybe the relationship is too friendly and therefore it doesn't really fulfill some of that accountability. Now, in terms of how you measure that and create performance measures is quite a difficult one, in that sense, because as Hannah touched on in terms of the scrutiny, it's not just about saying we've held X number of meetings. We really want to be able to show there's value in the outcomes, answer that so what question. So some of this is a combination of, it's very clear, it's very easy to put the processes and procedures in place and the governance arrangements in place, but they're only as good as the people within that making it operate. And I think that's the thing that we need to develop. And within that, if there are some national measures that emerge, then of course we will look to implement them and we will look to record them. And if those can be broken down to local level as well, then fine, because there are elements of police performance in terms of data which can be broken down more into the force locality areas. And we do, I know the Commissioner is quite keen, as I'm sure some of you are aware, to do that, and has regular meetings with your leaders and chief executives of the local authorities where data on an area basis is provided. But that's not necessarily answering your question about PCC performance. That's more about force performance. So, but one of the things that I am working with, we've just appointed an analyst to the team, and it's been a bit of a gap actually in our resource to start developing that in terms of, quite rightly, I think, Mr. Fox, I think you did ask the question about some key performance measures against the police and crime plan. And there are certain, particularly for projects, obviously you have to demonstrate how the money is being spent and what are the outcomes being achieved. So there's an element of some things that are already there. But what we're also looking to do is policing is very data rich, but it's translating that. And again, I think Hannah touched on that, translating that into, so what, if we just get a load of numbers and give you a load of numbers, that doesn't actually say whether that's having a positive impact on the communities of South Wales. So what we're working on is developing something that is meaningful as well, because sometimes, obviously what gets measured gets done, but it also has to be reflective of what's meaningful for the public. So I'm talking around it a little bit in terms of, if measures are developed, we would be part of that conversation. We would probably look to also engage yourselves in terms of developing those as well as we move forward. I think there would be benefits there. I would be concerned about being a slave to some performance measures, because I'm sure we've all been in organisations where we chase the performance measures and it doesn't actually provide good outcomes for the citizens. And so there is a balance to be had, and that you do need to know what you're doing. And this is one of the things that, with Hannah and some of the as I say, the analytical appointments we've made, we're really looking to be better on, and it is an area that I think will, post-election and the second phase of the review of PCCs, I think that will probably this element of performance for PCCs will start to emerge, and we'll have to build that into the way we operate. In relation then, I think, to the last bit about panel reps being observers, members of the panel being observers or attending any, that's not a problem. I know there's been discussions over the years about whether as well there opportunities for ride-alongs and things like that. But equally, if we've got interest in the governance and scrutiny, the arrangement for you to be engaged with either one of those panels, particularly if it's an area of interest from any of the members, we would welcome that, and I'm sure that could be facilitated. So I think Hannah's nodding there as well. So I know that's not a definitive, because I don't think the answer's binary right now, and that's not me trying to avoid it, Ian. I just think it's there are a lot of aspects to this, but it is something I think would add value. I agree, but it needs to be right and not just a bureaucratic, token gesture.
If I may, Chair, thank you very much for that. Maybe it's an issue the Chair will consider for a future meeting, this topic. I think, for me, if it's a principle, it's a basic principle, that if this information is available, not just from police sources, but from other criminal justice agencies, to build local pictures of crime, then I think the principle is one that should be taken forward. And I'll leave it there. I'll put a marker down for you, Lee. But unless local people have access to local information, then I guess kind of interest in PCC work, the work of the panel, is going to be kind of, for me, insufficiently forensic, if I can leave it at that. So thanks for your comments, grateful.
Yeah, sorry, Chair, just to follow up, I totally agree, actually, and Hannah will know that is a conversation we're having at the moment. So I think Hannah touched on the issue around stop and search and diversity and those issues. And we're really trying to get into, it is a bit of a national programme. A lot of our data is based on census data. And of course, we've all gone through another census. So what we're looking at is where can we better use that data, or where can we put systems in place where we can really drill into it. So I agree, and it's probably something that we will revisit in the near future to come back and hopefully. I mean, part of the role, as we both Hannah and I touched on, is partnership, working with other agencies, and again, something to come back to, because we might come back to look for assistance. Sometimes the problem is also getting data out of other partners as well. Some agencies are very reluctant or nervous because of data protection, but unfortunately, that can affect our ability to get a clear picture. Sorry, I think Hannah was going to add to that as well.
Hannah, would you like to add?
Yeah, sorry, I was just going to say that some of the local crime data that you may be thinking about, you may be able to find on police.uk. There's actually a lot on there. So you could go into any area of South Wales Police and you would find local crime data down to sort of postcode areas, if that's helpful.
Thank you, Hannah.
Can I just, a second, Chair? Thank you very much for that. I mean, I have a probation background. I'm very aware that probation keeps comprehensive post-coded data on individual offenders all through UK. So South Wales and each local authority theoretically has access to very detailed data. But I take your point entirely. Sorry, Chair.
No, that's fine. Thank you, Ian. Before I call you in, Councillor Gray, can I ask, do we know if Councillor Bowen Thompson has managed to join us? No? No. I'll take.
Chair, I can't see that she's.
No, that's why I'm asking the question. I can't see her either.
Chair, the most recent email I've received is that she's tried rebooting her computer, but it's still not working.
Okay.
So she's sorry, but she
Yeah,
doesn't think she's able to get on.
That's fine. That's fine. Okay. Many thanks for that. Okay. Councillor Gray.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Lee and Hannah, for your presentation. It was really useful to get a sense of the scrutinising levels within the Commissioner's office. My questions were around completing the loop of engagement, and actually how effective do the people who've taken part feel it's been. And I mean, you made reference to 1920 being the first year, I think, of this way of doing things, or certainly of the subjects you were doing on Deep Dive. Maybe I misheard that bit. You talk about all these different groups that have come in at that other level, and I just wonder if you had a chance to see, do they value that involvement? Because it's great having those names and logos against, the Commissioner's office and for South Wales Police to show that's their structure. But I wonder how much they value it and see it as useful. And then secondary to that, because I do think we're possibly straying into the political rather than the scrutiny, you did make mention around budget setting, and you also talked about public engagement. And previously in this panel, we've obviously had an interest in how the Commissioner's office has approached engaging around the budget and talking to members of the public. And I wondered, within the sort of assessment of your own scrutiny process or looking ahead, really these sort of things need to take the full year, even if we all know the problems that are faced by finding out information about the pure finances at the very last minute. But through the gateway of finding out about the service, you then build an effective engagement network, I imagine, who are then engaged to talk to you about other things. So my questions were sort of related around completing the circle of engagement and how valuable those outside organisations or indeed members of the public feel. I mean, maybe your visitors, your independent custody visitors, get a lot of benefit and feel that's really useful. That's quite a quick turn around, sort of going in feeling satisfied and putting a report in. But it might be quite a sort of a thoughtful process as to how engaging it is for those who are engaging with your panels. So I don't know if it's Hannah or Lee who's best to answer, but those are sort of my questions.
I'll initially respond if it's okay, Chair, and then I'm sure Hannah will. It's a couple of things. I mean, I suppose it's a statement again, which I'm sure Hannah and I would agree with, and we're constantly looking to improve that closing of the loop and how best utilize the resources that we've got in terms of getting that feedback. And I think it's an area we've been developing over the years, and there's been improvements, but there always can be in terms of getting. And we're also very conscious of any of our engagement and our work with both partners and the public, that it doesn't become white noise as well. But absolutely, in terms of your comment about it having value, that is something that we've worked very hard at trying to achieve, both in terms of our engagement and things like the accountability and legitimacy group is certainly an area where Hannah or I've had, and the panel members have had several conversations about, it really having value, and that both the panel members and the force get benefit from it, and that we're constantly, in terms of closing that feedback, we will go back and demonstrate where the feedback has been implemented in terms of policing policy or changes have been made. They influence some of the decisions that were made around automated facial recognition. There were changes to the recording of some of the stop and search categories. There were some errors identified by the panel, but we're able to feed that back. And we're also very keen that the panel themselves raise issues and topics that they're interested in, either because it's an interest to them as an independent member, or it's an interest to them as on behalf of the organisation that they represent. So it is a two-way flow, therefore, and that's why we also see it part of that governance structure of where it can go up and go down as well. And we're very keen as well that senior members of the force side use that group for engagement. So I'm not claiming it's perfect, because I'm sure there are some, because we've got quite a broad cross-section there. There will be some members who might feel, this particular topic isn't of interest to me, but actually, what we do ensure that there's this constant flow of feedback both ways. In terms of the public engagement, we want to get better at publicising and pushing back of more of how the public have influenced the direction, or their concerns have been taken on board. And I think that's always something we can improve on, but it's certainly part of our planning. And Hannah might want to add a little bit more to that than what I just said. Hannah, is there anything you wanted to add to that?
Just thanks for the question, really. Great question around how do we ensure that people are actually getting something out of it themselves, and we're very conscious of that. And I think Lee has covered it really, but what he's explained, we do have a document we regularly circulate to our PALG members, which is a list of things they've raised and then what we've done with them. So they know that we don't just sit on the information they give us, and we are constantly updating them to say how we've used that information for the better. So they can see quite tangibly what contribution they've been able to make to South Wales Police. But the other thing that we've done is we have, and you've just reminded me, we're just about to do another one now. We do send out surveys to them as well, just to ask them regularly for feedback, and if there are ways that we can improve the group, then we will. And we're about to do that again in the next couple of months for PALG, because we haven't done that probably for about 2 years now. And it's an open door. We want people to tell us if they feel that we can run things differently, and we're very open to change. So hopefully, that answers the question and lets you know that we are always thinking about that. Thank you.
That's great. Thank you, Chair. And thank you, Hannah and Lee.
You content, Councillor Gray?
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you very much. I've got one other indication at the moment. Mr. Melgeo, would you like to?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Thank you, Hannah. Thank you, Lee, for that update and presentation. If I can just pick up on just a few things. One is not losing the initiative. When you said that perhaps the PCC's office being the voice of the public should be subject of a wider presentation. I'd really be interested in the future to have how that's going to be achieved, notwithstanding what we've already heard and the work that's going on. But I think it really should fall on our shoulders to make sure that that statement has got some bones in, and we understand what you're talking about when you're the voice for the public. The other thing I'd like to say is also in relation to culture. And I know in the report, we talk about the culture and well-being, the 12 recommendations, and all but one have now been discharged. But when it comes to the new role of review body for complaints, I'm just wondering, has any work been done, or is it intended to perhaps triangulate the complaints by type and by individual officers, linked then into with professional standards, of course, on your dip sampling, and then to look at both internal and external, because this has a huge impact on the reputation of South Wales Police. I mean, we've only have to cast our mind nationally and to South Wales Police of some of the cases that we've heard of, which have had huge public interest, and I just think we've got to make sure, because this does reflect on how the public feel about us, and I just wonder if there's any work going on to address the culture, because I think the culture of any organisation can change for the good and for bad, and I just think it's important for the Police and Crime Panel to have a flavour that someone is looking at cultural change, and for us to have an update on what those findings are.
Okay, yeah, thank you, Mel. I'll go backwards if you like, because I think Hannah could probably answer the public engagement stuff question. But if I address the culture around the review body status of complaints, we're just over a year of taking on this responsibility, and we always plan to review the effectiveness and how that's working, because this new process and the new legislation was new to both us and professional standards, really. And actually our commissioner has also presented at select committee on the complaints, because there were various models that could be adopted. We have also had a recent, unfortunately, a change in the leadership on that side. So Jacqueline Trow, who developed the initial programme, has moved on, and we have, sorry, I have a new member of staff now who's leading on that. Which is unfortunate in the sense that Jackie had all the corporate memory, and the changes are quite significant in terms of the culture approach, because it's more about reflective practice rather than blame culture, I hope, and I think that's a positive thing. What has the organisation done that's led to this complaint, and what can the organisation do, rather than what does PC Jones do. But what we have with a new member of staff coming in is the ability to also have a fresh set of eyes whilst we review how effective this transition period has been. I'm also relying on, we've brought in some additional resource to help us do that review, somebody with experience of South Wales Police background, in order to help us also review it. So we've got a very good relationship with, and professional relationship with, Professional Standards Department. And I agree with you, Mel, that I see those trends and what's emerging from that very much a litmus test to the health of the organisation of South Wales Police. And it is something that I think a lot of work has gone into that area, as I'm sure you'll be aware. South Wales Police now does have a very well regarded, and as well has come out in terms of its inspection from the inspectorate, in terms of its process and how it manages investigations proactively and reactively. But you can't rest on your laurels. So that what you're suggesting is something that we are currently going through. And I think we are looking to be more efficient, more effective, to target our dip sampling in a better way. That's something as well that Hannah is also involved in, so it feeds the scrutiny, but it's also something that for a future panel we can also report up on, in terms of trends and areas of concern that we may be dealing with. A lot of the issues at the moment, just off the top of my head, will relate to the levels of things like incivility and those sort of issues as well. But there are some concerns that Hannah and I have discussed previously around, sexual misconduct or, abusive position and those kind of things. And I'm guessing, Mel, they're the sort of things as a panel that you'd be concerned about. So I take on board everything you say. I think it is something we can revisit with the panel at a future event, in terms of reviewing the review process, giving you some more statistics, some trends, some of the things that we're identifying, because like Hannah does with the overall scrutiny, we're going to get into the habit of being able to report on that more regularly and more consistently. So I hope that sort of answers that element. And maybe in terms of the engagement bit, I don't know, Hannah, you could jump in on that aspect.
Thank you, Lee.
Yeah, I'll just add as well on culture, because you rightly pointed out that we'd signed off all but one of the recommendations there. But what I would say is that the reason that we discharged the recommendations was not necessarily because they were complete, but because we felt assured that the force were going to take them forward in some way. So what the force have committed to is conducting a number of their own reviews, and they're taking forward some of the actions through sort of culture and wellbeing plans that they've assured us they have in place. So we're not going to just take our eyes off the ball now and not continue to look at that. We're going to just be looking at that through those mechanisms. So we have formal processes in place now where we can look at culture change and how people are feeling. There's a lot in there around how officers and staff are feeling on the ground. So we will continue to do that, hold into account on that topic, but it'll just be through the mechanisms that the force are developing, and we felt confident that they were developing. Around community engagement, I think there's probably quite a lot that we could share with you in the future around the work we do there, because it's a whole topic of its own, really. As I said earlier, we do have a public engagement programme in place each year. It's been very difficult over the last year because the things that we would normally turn up and physically attend, we haven't been able to do, but we've tried our best to do things online. We've developed youth conversations, for example, online, which have been really helpful. We're finding that lots of young people are more than happy to turn up to a meeting on Zoom where they may never have wanted to attend in person to a police station of an evening. So we're actually finding new ways, and sometimes the difficulties we've been in have presented us with some opportunities, I would say. So we've got a lot that we could tell you about potentially at a later date, and maybe we could bring a report to you on some of the engagement we're doing, some of the methods, some of the feedback, and how we're using all of that. I'd be more than happy to share that maybe at a later point.
Thank you, Hannah. Thank you, Lee. Thank you, Chair, for indulging me.
You happy, Mel?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, that's brilliant. I have no other indications that anybody wants to ask a question. So can I just say that the recommendation is simply asking us to consider the report, but I will ask for a mover and a seconder on the recommendation.
Yeah, I move, Chair.
Thank you.
I'll second it, Chair.
Thank you, Mel. Okay, thank you so much. Moving on, item number 5 is the report on the oversight of complaints. So, Lee, I'm assuming you're going to take us through this report?
No, Chair, that's me.
Simon.
These are
sorry, yes, of course, it'll be Simon, won't it?
Yeah. Actually, it's a good little lead in, because obviously you've heard how the Commissioner's Office are looking at how the police handle complaints. Obviously, our role is to handle complaints made against the Commissioner or the Deputy Commissioner. The last report was put up 22 months ago, and this report that I've prepared sets out all the complaints that have come in the intervening 22 months. I'm trying to share the screen here, so the report comes up. Is that up on the screen now? I can't see.
Yes, it is.
Yeah, you can see it?
Yeah.
Okay, so...
Yes, Simon.
Okay, so when a complaint comes in to the panel, in the first instance, I consider it to see whether or not it's a conduct complaint, a serious complaint, or a complaint that can be dealt with by the panel itself. Now, conduct complaints are complaints where there's an allegation, or you can read into the complaint that there's an element of criminality on the part of the Commissioner. So it may not actually say that, but if you can imply it into the wording, then that's what's called a conduct matter, and that has to go to the IOPC for them to consider. Some complaints come in and say it as they feel it is, that there is a criminal element to it, and they call serious complaints. Again, they must go straight to the IOPC. So what I will do in those cases, I'll write to the chair and to the monitoring officer of Merthyr Council, who is also handles these complaints with the chair, and there's no discretion there. Basically, it has to go to the IOPC. They'll look into it, and they will let us know what their findings are. Very often they look at it and they say that there is no evidence of any criminality, and they send it back to us to continue the investigation. And if that's the case, providing there's an element of there's a substantial element to the complaint, then we'll send it to the Chief of Staff, to Lee, to investigate on our behalf, because we have no investigative powers ourselves. The third type of complaint are non-criminal complaints. Again, what we'll do then, I send that to the chair and the monitoring officer. They will consider that, and we will usually send those off to Lee for him to look into and to come to not a decision. He will carry out the investigation and then send his findings back to us. The chair and the monitoring officer will then consider what Lee has uncovered or investigated, and we will then come to a decision whether to uphold the complaint or otherwise. In the last 22 months, there have only been 3 complaints against the Commissioner. Appendix 1, which I'm scrolling through now, you see the last one was the 15th of December from this one gentleman. He has made 6 complaints to the panel during the lifetime of the panel. First one back in 2014, the last one in December. And the last one in December was a complaint that the Commissioner's website is failing to record the information that it must do in relation to complaints made against the Commissioner. I've been in contact with Lee concerning that, and we were satisfied at the time that the information was there, and that that complaint should not be upheld. That was then relayed to the complainant, who then returned very recently, I think it was earlier this month, to say that that's wrong, that he still cannot find the information that should be on the website. So I've gone back to Lee again, and I had a brief email from Lee this morning to say that that has, I think, been resolved, but I haven't discussed that with Lee, so I won't go any further than that. But you can see that that's the sort of complaint that we've got currently in relation to this one complainant, and you'll see down here that back when we considered it, it wasn't upheld. So I'll liaise with Lee in relation to this one, but that's likely to be the decision for this one. The next one then is back in May of 2020. This was quite a complicated complaint that came in from a gentleman that had an issue with a criminal investigation against him. He was unhappy with that investigation and sought information from the police, not South Wales Police at the time. I think this is up in the north of England. He was looking for information that he believed that the police were withholding from him. He wasn't happy with the response he had from the police up north, and made a formal complaint to the IOPC. That was investigated by a South Wales Police officer who was put in to investigate that. And from there, a complaint is snowballed against South Wales Police for, he believes, withholding information or even destroying information that he thinks is relevant to the initial substantive criminal matter. So what happens there is, as often happens, he's not happy with South Wales Police, and he goes to the IOPC. They investigate. He wasn't happy with the findings of the IOPC, and therefore complains to the Commissioner. He's then not happy with the Commissioner's response and complains to us. We've looked at it in great depth. I think the Commissioner's office actually took Council's opinion on this, and ultimately that complaint has not been upheld. So that was quite a complicated one. I can give far more information on this to anybody who's interested outside of this formal meeting, because I'm mindful that I mean, this maybe isn't the forum to discuss these matters in any depth. But what I can say is the complaint against the Commissioner wasn't upheld. We are satisfied that there was no misconduct on the part of the Commissioner. In the same way as the Commissioner, one step down, found there was no misconduct on the part of the Chief Constable, But this one may well rumble on. I'm not convinced this has come to an end. And if there's more to update you, I'll do that. But again, as I say, I'd welcome the chance to speak to anybody who wants to know a little bit more about this case, but not in today's forum. So that one was quite a detailed one. The next one, back in June, they came in almost at the same time, and this was a complaint about a conversation. Again, it starts from a criminal investigation of a person. He was unhappy with a conversation that had taken place between the former Chief Constable and an MP that involved this original criminal investigation. He considered there was misconduct on the part of the Chief Constable and he complained to the Commissioner. The Commissioner didn't uphold that, and therefore he complained to us that the Commissioner had been guilty of misconduct by not properly investigating the complaint against the Chief Constable. We looked at it and we were satisfied that the conversation initially between the Chief Constable and the MP was a legitimate conversation that can take place. We were satisfied that the Commissioner had looked at it properly, and on that basis we did not uphold that one. So that one again was quite an interesting one. And then the last couple that came in, look, there's one in November. This was a very disturbing one from somebody in the Swansea area, saying that there was a conspiracy with various individuals throughout the UK to commit serious criminal acts. It was something that fortunately doesn't fall upon us because it was Dyfed-Powys Police. There was no direct complaint against the Commissioner. It's not something that we investigated, and it's been sent to Dyfed-Powys Police for them to deal with as they see fit. And then the last two were complaints against officers of South Wales Police. And again, that's not for us to look into. And of course, we forwarded those complaints on to the Professional Standards Department. I think for some reason, it depends what you actually entered into Google. If you say complaint against South Wales Police, our details come up. But if they come to me, it's not a big issue. I'll then forward it straight to the Professional Standards Department in South Wales Police. So as you can see, there's only been 3 complaints in the last 22 months, and that is that's good because there's no increase in complaints. In fact, I think complaints against the Commissioner have, over the 9 years we've been running, have gradually decreased year in, which is obviously what everybody would like to see. So, Chair, those are the complaints. As I said, I'm happy to answer questions on them, but as long as they're not too detailed. But then if you want to drill into them, I can meet with any member outside of this meeting. Is that okay?
Thank you, Simon. Yes, that's fine. And in actual fact, the recommendation in this report is simply to note it. And what I would suggest is that we simply do that. And may I suggest to members of the panel, rather than asking questions or making comments at this point, that if they are interested in any one of those cases, that they contact you directly, yes. Simon, because I think the nature contained within those is quite sensitive. I'm happy for members of the panel to contact you. I'm not really happy to open this up for debate. So can I have someone to move the report, the recommendation to note this report, please?
Happy to move the report. Second, Chair.
Thank you, everyone. Yes, thank you for that. Item number 6 on the agenda is any other business deemed urgent by the Chair. I can inform everybody now that I've not received any urgent business that needs to be brought to this meeting at the moment. So it only remains for me to the attendance this morning and to remain safe and sound, and remotely, or whether we meet person to person, as it were. Let's just say I'm looking forward to meeting you all at that meeting. Thank you so much. Can I ask Simon to stay on the line, please? Take care, everyone.
Okay.
Take care all.
Thanks.
Bye. Thank you.